From your local election headquarters, this is a special presentation of News 8, a town hall meeting with District Attorney Sandra Doorley and DA candidate Shani Curry-Mitchell.
Hello, I'm Judy Sternberg, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metropolitan area. The League is pleased to co-sponsor these important town halls with the 2019 candidates for Monroe County District Attorney. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. We encourage informed and active participation in government and believed informed voters are the backbone of our democracy. We are grateful to WROC TV News 8 for presenting this program. For more information on who and what will be on your ballot, we invite you to visit the League's electronic voter guide at vote411.org. And we remind you that this year, New York State has early voting going on now through Sunday, November 3rd, or vote as usual on Election Day, November 5th. Visit the Monroe County Board of Elections website for early voting sites and hours. Thank you.
And thank you to all those with the League of Women Voters. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for watching these town halls here at News 8 as part of our coverage of the race for Monroe County District Attorney. Tonight, we'll be talking with current District Attorney Sandra Doorley, a Republican, and her opponent, Shani Curry-Mitchell, a prosecutor and a Democrat. We're going to have a live audience throughout both of these town halls. Both of these women are running for a seat at a time when criminal justice reforms, they are top of mind for local, state, and federal lawmakers. In other words, this is not a seat inside a silo. The first town hall will be with Sandra Doorley, so thank you, Ms. Doorley, for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Our first question comes from Mary Myers from our partners, the League of Women Voters.
Hello, thank you for doing this, all of you. There is currently proposed legislation in Monroe County to make it a crime to, among other things, annoy first responders. Do you agree with those who believe this law would be unconstitutionally vague? And if so, would you as district attorney support it in court?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. But throughout my career, I've supported first responders. First responders are there to protect people. They are the first ones at the scene of tragedies, at fires, at homicides. They need to do their job, and they need to do their job very quickly. So I would support that law because it's very important for them to render aid. And again, sometimes they're dealing with, seconds of viable time where they have to get aid to someone in order to sustain life or deliver treatment. So yes, I believe that that is a very good law.
A follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Do current laws already protect against something like assault or anything like that that might interfere with their work?
Sure. There's always obstructing governmental administration. It's a misdemeanor. It's whenever someone is interfering with the process of a government. We have on occasions where a police officer is effecting an arrest and a citizen is trying to stop the police officer from doing that. We have charged obstructing governmental administration, and then depending on what's actually done, we could also charge resisting arrest. But again, I get back to what is important. Our first responders, put their lives on the line for us. They're out there and they're making a difference, and sometimes they only have seconds to react, and we have to give them our full attention and our support.
All right, our next questioner is Mike Mazzio. He is the president of the Locust Club, which is the union that represents Rochester Police. Mike?
Good evening.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Sandra. Discovery reforms place assigned responsibilities on information possessed by law enforcement that must be turned over to the defense. Anytime a 911 call, radio transmissions, body-worn camera video, or audio recording is created, the arresting officer or the lead detective must make copies and notify the prosecution of their existence in writing. Once a criminal case is filed, if not, the defense can move for and the courts must order a remedy or sanction. This requires that police officers or detectives are responsible for ensuring that any body-worn camera video of any assisting police officer, no matter how minor their role in an arrest may have been, would have to be reviewed in order to determine if it's relevant. It would basically require that all that body-worn camera video of assisting officers be reviewed in totality to ensure that anything relevant is turned over. This could entail hours of video footage. It also assumes that who reviews that video would have a clear understanding of what may or may not be relevant. How will you, as district attorney, ensure that there is compliance with all of the numerous police agencies in Monroe County? How will you handle questions of interpretation on what is relevant? What burden does this place on police staffing of your office? And do you have a plan to put this into existence on January 1st of 2020?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. This is a very good question because as everyone is talking about, come January 1st, there is criminal justice reform. So criminal justice reform has three parts. It has the bail reform, it has discovery reform, and it has speedy trial reform. So what Mike is talking about is discovery. So now within 15 days of arraignment, whether that be on a felony complaint, misdemeanor complaint, or an indictment, we must give over every bit of information related to the subject matter of the case. That means we've got to get everything that law enforcement has within our files. We need to get every single body camera video of any single officer that responded to the scene. All of that must be given over within 15 days. So what my staff has done and what we're doing going forward, when this legislation was passed back in April in the budget bill, I've set up a team with my senior staff. We have been meeting weekly. We have gone out to every single law enforcement agency to try to think of a seamless way to transfer all of this information to the DA's office. Because if this information isn't given to us and we can't turn it over, these cases get dismissed, and we can't have that. So we were looking for ways to maybe have our computers, IT, speak to each other, especially with the body-worn cameras. You're talking volumes and volumes of information. And yes, that has got to be reviewed before we turn it over to the defense. We have to know what is on those body-worn cameras. We have to know if there is information regarding a victim or a witness, where somewhere down the line we may want to file for a protective order to protect them pending a disposition of the case. It is going to take hours upon hours to compile all of this information. And again, my team has been working around the clock trying to think of, a seamless way to do this. We go back to the first part of Mike Mazzio's question. It had to do with the 911 call, how a criminal case is initiated oftentimes. There is so much data that we have and we've learned from the 911 center. All of that information has to come to us. We are responsible for collecting it. So I could tell you, and I can assure everyone in Monroe County, we are on it. We will make sure this transition is seamless. We will help our law enforcement partners. I wish I had some more money and some more staffing to make it seamless, but we will work with what we can to make sure that we are still able to prosecute cases in Monroe County.
When you hear defense attorneys, at least downstate, talk about this, they were saying there was a problem before because they didn't have the appropriate information, not just to go to trial, but also to determine whether a plea agreement should be taken or not. What's your response to that concern?
Exactly. You know what? Here in Monroe County, we don't do trial by ambush. I was hired in 1992 by Howard Rellin. Howard Rellin's policy was we are going to have an open discovery policy, which means we are going to turn over all of the information as soon as practicable to the defense. That's the way he ran his office, that's the way Mike Green ran his office, and that's the way I run my office. Within 15 days, that's putting a tremendous burden on law enforcement, because you think about all of the reports. Take a homicide, for example. How many, from responding officers to first responders to police investigators to those who canvass the area, think about all of the paperwork that's generated. They must be turning this over in 15 days. And frankly, I don't know how law enforcement is going to abide by that. But again, if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to go forward with the case. We're not going to be able to announce readiness, and it risks cases getting dismissed.
To be transparent, Mike Mazzio, he's with the Locust Club. The Locust Club has endorsed Ms. Doorley. Our next questioner, her group, Citizen Action of New York, has endorsed her opponent. And joining me now is Mercedes Phelan with her question. Mercedes.
Hi, thank you very much. New York State is the marijuana arrest capital of the country, despite the fact that low-level marijuana possession has been decriminalized since 1977. Data from the State Division of Criminal Justice Services show the vast majority of people arrested for low-level marijuana possessions in the city of Rochester are black, 81%. Despite the fact that there are comparable numbers of black and white residents living in Rochester, and government reports consistently show that black and white people consume marijuana at similar rates, Sandra Doorley, why did you wait until this year, an election year, to state that your office would stop prosecuting low-level marijuana charges?
Okay, thank you. You know, there's several parts to that question, but I want to say, even before this year, for low-level marijuana cases, and we've got to break it down. What do you mean by low-level? I know that WROC Normal has declared that anything under 2 ounces would be low-level. Would you agree with me with that? Okay, so that would be a B misdemeanor, criminal possession of marijuana in the 5th degree. But you also have the violation of unlawful possession of marijuana. That's having less than 25 grams. So what we have done for the last, I don't even know how many years, if someone comes into court, if it's a standalone charge, I'm not talking about maybe someone who is arrested for driving while under the influence, a standalone charge, we have done what we call adjourn them in contemplation of dismissal, which means that within 6 to 12 months, their case would be dismissed. Now, I look at the WROC Normal reports, and it does say that there is a higher number of low-level marijuana arrests in Monroe County, and I look at the numbers that they cite, 1,753 marijuana arrests in Monroe County. But, you know, we looked at the data that we have in our office because we do collect data. Now, you have to remember, unlawful possession of marijuana, that's a low level, under 25 grams, that is a violation. That's not a fingerprintable offense. So these numbers that are in this report are low-level offenses where there was either an arrest for criminal possession of marijuana 5th, or they were tied to another charge, such as perhaps a weapon or, you know, kilos of cocaine or just some other charge. So we came up with 267 cases of standalone cases of criminal possession of marijuana in the 5th degree. 67% of those arrested, of those defendants, were black. 31% of those defendants were white. But then we pulled the disposition of, meaning how did we dispose of those cases? Because that document, the WROC Normal report that talks about the disparity in the marijuana arrests only talks about the arrests. It doesn't talk about what happens with the case upon arrest. So 73% of the black defendants, or 132, were either ACD'd, outright dismissed, or pled guilty to a violation, as opposed to those of white, 66% were ACD'd and then outright dismissed or pled guilty to a violation. So we weren't prosecuting marijuana to the fullest extent of the law. I said we were agreeing to adjourn them in contemplation of dismissal. But when I did read this report and I spoke to advocates, especially advocates of WROC Normal, you know, they made arguments for legalization. I don't believe in legalization, I believe in decriminalization. And I had, you know, numerous conversations with them, and what struck me, or what really resonated to me the most was an individual advocate that came in and said, look, I have an illness, and marijuana helps me focus. And I thought, you know, being a cancer survivor, people had said to me, why don't you use marijuana, you know, when I took my chemotherapy? But I understood what she was talking about, and it made sense to me. If people are going to choose to, you know, personally consume under 2 ounces, then I wasn't going to prosecute it. Now, if you think about criminal justice reform, in order to prosecute a low-level marijuana offense, we would have to have our lab test all of the drugs. We would have to get all of the body-worn cameras of all the officers making the arrests. Again, we would have to go through all of the reports. We would have to go through all of the 911 reports and information and get all of that before we could even prosecute a low-level offense. So in light of all of that, I decided to decriminalize it myself. And actually, after I made that decision, I believe it was a couple of weeks after, the legislature decided to take what we know as criminal possession of marijuana 5th and reduce it to a violation, so it is a non-criminal offense.
Okay, great.
I know that's a lot of
thorough. I want to go to the great internet right now for our next question. Robert McMullen wrote into us on the News 8 Facebook page, and he's asking this. How would you stop the revolving door of people who commit a crime, then get a light sentence or released, and then go back to committing another crime. And I'll just add on to Robert's comment there. We just saw the unfortunate incident with
Absolutely.
Rochester police officer Denny Wright. The man accused of stabbing him had been in a lot of trouble over the last year, had been in court for arraignment and then let out. So that certainly is a very topical question, I think, for us.
Absolutely. But you have to understand, first of all, before we can go in court and prosecute a case, we have to have cooperative victims and cooperative witnesses. That's the biggest hurdle that we have. How do we stop the revolving door? You know what? There are times when the criminal justice system can help people. You know, I am a big proponent of diversion courts. I know that may not be popular with a lot of people, but I believe that when the criminal justice system is there and can help someone, especially with the nonviolent crime, we should reach out our hand and help them. You know, for example, we have all of the drug courts, the opioid stabilization court, our traditional drug court, our judicial diversion part, where those people who are suffering from substance abuse disorder, we want to stop them. We don't want them coming in time after time again and committing low-level offenses, so we're sending them to drug court. The same with mental health issues. We have a mental health court, and even along with my partners in law enforcement, what we did, which began in June of this year, we decided that those who are suffering from mental illness and who commit a low-level felony, nonviolent felony, and those who commit a misdemeanor, and they're suffering from mental addiction, a mental issue, a mental condition, we don't want to house them in the Monroe County Jail. We want to get them help. So we're diverting them out of the criminal court system. We're bringing them right to St. Mary's. If they meaningfully engage and continue with their treatment, we're never going to bring that person into the courtroom. So that's another way we can stop the revolving door. And again, diversion courts, we have our gun crimes part. We have our human trafficking court, which we're going to be doing a press conference tomorrow that we're expanding it to include cases throughout the whole county. We have, you know, our veterans court for those who are suffering from PTSD, those who have honorably served our country, and we want to help them. So there's so many things that we can do to stop that process. And hopefully, if the court system can help people and get them on the right track, we won't see them coming in. But then the flip side, and I'll bring it back again, in order for us to prosecute the worst of the worst, we need people to cooperate. And, you know, our cases are just as good as our witnesses. So if our witnesses aren't cooperative, you know, our ability to get a conviction is hard.
Bavona Child Advocacy Center has been a partner with your office, and theoretically they could continue to be so with you or your opponent, whoever wins. So joining me now is Deb Rosen with Bavona. Deb, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. As you know, the DA's office interacts significantly with victims of violent crimes, and we know that certain populations of people are disproportionately victimized by interpersonal violence: women, children, those with disabilities, and people of color. Can you please talk about what services you think are most critical to supporting survivors of interpersonal violence, and what responsibility the DA's office has in developing, implementing, and funding those services?
You know, absolutely. There's so many people that come through our office, whether we end up partnering with them and bringing a court proceeding, or whether we, you know, actually just refer them out for services. But some people come to us when it's their last resort. You know, I can't tell you how many, you know, women, I'm going to say women of domestic violence, come to our office and, you know, they want to cooperate, but for, you know, some reasons. It could be economic, it could be, you know, they want to protect their children. They're not ready to actually take that step and actually testify in court. But what we can do in those situations, and what we do, is we refer them out to our partners. Not only do we partner with Bavona, but we partner with Willow, Resolve, and the Domestic Violence Consortium to make sure that we are getting people who need help, again, the right resources for them. Again, the criminal justice system isn't just about prosecuting people and sending them to jail. It's about making the right connections, making the right partnerships, and making sure that people get the support that they need. And, you know, with our Bavona Child Advocacy Center, it's one of our, you know, biggest partners. I mean, I can't even, you know, tell you the horrors that they see day in and day out. And the men and women who prosecute the child abuse cases in my office are tremendous, and I hold them in the utmost regard.
So that kind of links to my next question, and I'm going to take one for myself now. When people vote, they're not just voting for your platform. right? Because you're a district attorney. Sometimes it's odd, I think, when you have political parties get involved in this particular type of race. They're voting for you. So on that note, I'd like to know if you could name one case that impacted you the most, or one of several that impacted you the most.
Sure. If you know, I've been a DA for 28 years. Probably the case that has left the biggest impact on me was the prosecution of Thomas Johnson III. He's the individual that murdered Officer Darrell Pearson. That was a case where, I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget, getting myself, I was coming home, I'm getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden, I get the call, an officer is down, and just going out to the scene. And just the way that law enforcement banded together to make sure that everything was done correctly, that everything was done by the book. And if you remember in that case, Officer De Palma was able to subdue the defendant by shooting him in, I believe it was one of his limbs. And let me tell you something, when members of law enforcement knew that they had a brother who was down on the way to the hospital and didn't know if he was going to survive, just the way that the police officers at the scene handled that and the way they dealt with Thomas Johnson III, they made sure that he had, the best care. They made sure that he got the help that they needed. They worked with the utmost integrity. And then when the case came, and the magnitude of what had happened in the community here, we lost a police officer. We haven't lost a police officer in, I don't even know, how long it had been before that. And just, representing the community, representing the family, representing law enforcement, there was a lot of pressure, and I wanted to make sure that, I was able to secure that justice for the community, and I did. So I will never, ever forget that case.
I have another question from our online friends. Riley O'Brien asks this question. I would like to know how both district attorney candidates, so in this case Ms. Doorley, plans to address the opioid epidemic.
Okay. So in 2015, I believe it was, in the spring and in the summer, I had been talking to members of law enforcement who worked in the Special Investigations Bureau of the Rochester Police Department, and they deal with narcotics investigations. And, this officer had said to me, hey, have you ever started to take a look at all of the people who were dying, of overdoses? And at that time, we hadn't really put together all of this data. So in August of that year, 2017, I, got all of my law enforcement partners together, and I said, look, I have looked at other areas within the state, and I specifically looked at Westchester County and Richmond County because there's similar demographics to us. And I said, look, they're collecting real-time data from all overdoses. They're treating them like homicides. This way, we're able to, see who the dealers are, because there's so much information out there at the scene of an overdose that would help us with long-term investigations, and we're able to, that we would be able to put together complex litigations and perhaps even charge dealers with homicides. So since August of 2017, we began to put this Monroe County Heroin Task Force together. When Todd Baxter became sheriff in 2018, he joined on board. I have dedicated 2 investigators to this heroin task force. But you have to see, what are we doing with it? Our concentration really is on education and prevention because we can't arrest our way out of it. So if you look at it, we're going to continue trying to prevent people from starting in the first place. Then there is the treatment component, because as I said, the criminal justice system can help people help themselves. So we're taking those who have substance abuse disorder and we're deferring them to drug treatment, or even sometimes deferring them right to open access or to some of our treatment providers in the community. And then, I've drawn a line in the sand. Look at, if you are a drug dealer and you're bringing this poison into our community, because the medical examiner's office is telling us last year that 94.4% of the drugs found in people who have overdosed, it was fentanyl. And this is coming from Mexico, it's coming from China. If you're bringing that dirty drug into our community, we're going to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. And if we can put together a homicide, you know what, I'm not ashamed that my office has prosecuted now, we're on our 10th case where we are prosecuting individuals for selling dirty dope and causing the death of someone. And you know what? I think it's our responsibility. It's my responsibility, because drugs have no business being in our community. So how do we go forward with the Monroe County Heroin Task Force? We're going to continue, educate, prevention, treatment to those who need it, and prosecute those drug dealers for selling and for homicide.
We want to give you time for your closing remarks. So 1 minute, if you will.
Thank you. So, you know what? Experience matters. I've been doing this job for 28 years. I've been your DA for 8 years. I have an office that I run with integrity and conviction. The men and women who work for me have the utmost in ethics. We are making sure that we do justice in every case. You know, one of the most frustrating things that I am seeing now are these negative ads against me, and they are not true. And I urge anyone to actually look up the cases and see what happened. It's not true. The men and women in my office do justice in each and every case, day after day. And we will continue to do that, because public safety is first and foremost in all of our minds. We want to make sure that when you go home at night, you can sleep safely.
Ms. Doorley, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Real quick. Before we let you go, a reminder that the second town hall is coming up next. This is her opponent, Ms. Doorley's opponent. Her name is Shani Curry-Mitchell. She's been a prosecutor for quite some time as well, and she's going to be on the Democratic ticket on this year's ballot. We're going to hear her views on a variety of issues coming up. Stay with us.
From your local election headquarters, this is a special presentation of News 8, a town hall meeting with District Attorney Sandra Doorley and DA candidate Shani Curry-Mitchell.
Welcome back. This is our second town hall in our coverage of the race for Monroe County District Attorney. We're joined now by Shani Curry-Mitchell, an experienced prosecutor and running on messages of trust and equality. She's the Democratic candidate running against Republican Sandra Doorley, who is the current district attorney. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Also with us, we have our studio audience. It's a fun group tonight, and among them we have community members who will be asking questions of our candidate. Our first question is from Myra Pells. She's from our partner in all of this, the League of Women Voters. Myra.
Thank you. My question is, there's currently proposed legislation in Monroe County to make it a crime to, among other things, annoy first responders. Do you agree with those who believe this law would be unconstitutionally vague? And if so, would you as district attorney support it in court?
Thank you, Myra, for that question. Our first responders are necessary, and they are vital to protection and safety of our community, and it is very important. I am very interested in reviewing said legislation and understanding it, but it is important that we do provide protection to our first responders. There are other laws out there that require us to do and move to the side as first responders are responding to and helping others in the community, because we need them to do their job. I am not familiar with the legislation, but I will, if enacted, it is my job to enforce the law, but we do understand that laws have to be, have to put all citizens on notice as to what in fact we are enforcing, so that we know that that is necessary. But if I become district attorney, that I would have to enforce the law as written.
Yeah, so
until it's challenged.
Right. So the proposal at hand, which could be challenged in court because of one of the criticisms, essentially it would add to the penal code another type of crime that could be attached to harassing a first responder. Now, harassment could mean anything from assault to perhaps yelling at a first responder. The critics of the law are saying, look, we already have laws on the books that would prosecute someone who actually assaults a first responder. Right. And as far as yelling at a first responder, they're worried that that might be a breach of First Amendment rights.
And that's possible, and we have to allow the system to work and for those to oppose it. But one thing, as prosecutors, we do have this thing called discretion. So if the law is enacted, prosecutors can review the facts and based upon the facts determine how to properly dispose of such case.
Before we get to our next live questioner, I do have a question from Neil Gunther. He's with the Bar Association here in Monroe County, and he asked this. New state law eliminates cash bail for misdemeanor and nonviolent offenses, meaning fewer people going to jail as they await trial. Your opponent criticized it, claiming this will lead to in her words, a catch and release policy. What's your position on this?
I was very disturbed at her use of the language catch and release. It invokes language of racism and prejudice. This law was enacted to address the various inequities in our bail system. It is not a perfect system, but we have to remember that the 8th Amendment ensures that we only impose bail to ensure that people are released, will return to court, and that is important. You are innocent until proven guilty. Will ensure that people are protected. That is still part of the law. That is not, the judges are not void of that discretion, but the law is there to ensure that people return to court. That is the reason for bail, but it has been historically used in a punitive manner instead of ensuring that people return to court.
I mentioned this during the previous town hall with District Attorney Sandra Doorley. We invited 2 people to ask questions, and then each of them has actually endorsed one of the candidates. They have opposing views on a lot of matters, so we wanted to bring them up so they could ask pertinent questions. Our first of the 2 is Mercedes Phelan. She's with Citizen Action of New York. Mercedes, welcome back.
Thank you. More than 1,300 people are jailed in Monroe County on any given day, with nearly 60% being held pretrial. A 2018 NICLU report shows that between 2010 and 2014, in Monroe County alone, more than 1,900 people spent 1 week or more behind bars on a bail of $250 or less, with 3 of those years being under DA Doorley. Critical bail and discovery law reforms to address this crisis will go into effect on January 1st, 2020. Will you commit to publicly and fully supporting the new bail and discovery laws and to implementing a system of comprehensive public reporting of pretrial data as District Attorney of Monroe County?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mercedes, for that question. Again, the law will go into effect January 1, and it is my job as District Attorney to enforce said law. I will definitely ensure that my assistants that are under me will understand, know the law, and will enforce it appropriately. We will ensure that that we are asking for bail only in those situations where there has been a history of individuals not coming back to court, as it is such. If there is a need for protection of victims, we will ask for orders of protection, and if there is a need for a reason to ask for any type of a hold on an offender, then that will be asked for. But my office the assistants will be properly trained for such. In addition to, as it relates to bail reform, again, that is a law that has been enacted because of the fact that individuals were not apprised of the entire case that was before them. And so it is important that defendants, before they take pleas, before they go to trial, that they are given the information. We are the people. We hold all the cards. So it's important that everyone is apprised of the information that is before them before any disposition of the case occurs.
One of the concerns about the discovery law that mandates disclosure of this information to the defense attorneys in a certain amount of time is that it's not enough time. If you do win this election, you'll have an office with a certain number of resources, and it's going to have limits to it. Are you concerned about trying to meet those demands coming out of Albany with the resources that you have?
So we talk about the 15 days. We actually have additional 30 days before we have to ask the court for additional time. So the law has written in safeguards for us. We have technically 45 days before we have to ask for more time. And as long as the court sees that we are doing our due diligence, we can always ask for more time. So it's a rule, but there are exceptions to every rule that we have. So I believe that our office will be able to. Now, there is always a concern that we don't have enough support staff, absolutely. But we also know that our prosecutors will have to work in concert with our support staff to ensure that it happens. That's one of the issues that I had when I was there in the DA's office, of this cohesive type of working relationship that wasn't there. But we would work together as an office to ensure that we are meeting the goals, meeting the law, and ensuring that we are ensuring that we have that we're meeting the rights of the offender.
The last questioner that we heard from, Mercedes Phelan, she endorsed Shani Curry Mitchell. Our next questioner is Mike Mazzio. He's with the Locust Club, which is the police union that represents Rochester Police. The Locust Club endorsed Ms. Mitchell's opponent, Mike Mazzio. Thank you again for joining us.
Good evening. Currently, there's a referendum vote in place for the city of Rochester voters to decide to enact a civilian police accountability board. That board will eliminate the authority of the chief of police to decide if discipline is warranted on a police officer. This board, which, if enacted, would have no one with any relevant law enforcement experience being allowed to serve on it. Do you believe the level of training and the complexities of laws, procedures, policy, and orders that police officers are required to know and work under, would a civilian board be able to effectively review and determine that actions taken by a police officer would be appropriate or not under the conditions in which their actions occurred? If so, why or why not?
Thank you, Mr. Investigator Mazzio, for that question. Currently, there is an issue of trust with our community and the local law enforcement. And I know that City Council, as well as the Police Accountability Board, is working and has put forth this referendum to work to address that issue. And it's, we currently have a system that's run by the police department when doling out discipline. But there's also a citizen review board that is also part of that disciplinary process. So citizens are part of the process now, to answer part of the question. I can't delve too deep into that. I currently work as a municipal attorney that handles discipline as my current position. So I don't want to violate any issues or trust or that I have with that. But I will say this, when it comes to people feeling safe with their law enforcement, we have a long way to go with addressing the issues with law enforcement. Law enforcement, the majority of law enforcement in our community are doing a wonderful thing in protecting the rights of all. And I believe that whatever the citizens of the city of Rochester do, it will be done, it will work for the betterment of all of us as citizens of Monroe County.
You will be an arm of law enforcement as a district attorney, and you have been as a prosecutor in the past. You see alleged cases of police brutality, and yet you are connected to law enforcement. How do you bridge that divide? How do you make that job work?
Well, as a prosecutor, we are there to enforce the laws, period. No matter who is alleged to have violated them or violated the trust of the community. And so I've worked hand in hand with law enforcement for years throughout my career, and there's never been an issue with trust. And so I believe that that won't be a problem at all. I've had a great working relationship with law enforcement, and I have the trust of law enforcement. So I don't believe that'll be an issue.
Thank you. I do want to go online for a second.
Sure.
A gentleman wrote to me directly on Twitter, and his name is Joseph Sayre, and he said this: I'd like Ms. Mitchell to respond to the specific allegations laid out by the Monroe County GOP, and what I gather from that is Mr. Sayre would like you to address the allegations that a lot of outside money came in to support your candidacy, the likes of which we really haven't seen in our area in some time.
I think that it is telling of the nature of our criminal justice system and the fact that I am talking about and putting forth these reforms that are necessary here in Monroe County, that the likes of an outside PAC is interested in the platform that I have and is excited about the reforms that I am talking about to ensure that fairness and justice is occurring here in Monroe County. I have no control over the amount of money. I have no control over the type of campaign that they decide to run. No one is saying that the ads that are being run are untrue. All I can tell you is that it is a true telling of the nature and the status of the criminal justice system in Monroe County, that it has attracted outside forces to this campaign.
Looking broadly at elections and financing of elections, do you support that kind of monetary influence?
It has happened all over. It's not just because it is happening here in Monroe County, but it happens all over the country. There weren't complaints. It weren't complaints when the Republicans have billions of billionaires supporting their efforts, like the Koch brothers. No one complains then, but when it happens to a young girl from the southwest part of the city who matriculated through the city school districts and had a vision of a more just and fair criminal justice system, now it's a problem. That is unfair.
Our next question comes from Deb Rosen. She's with the Bavona Child Advocacy Center.
Right.
She works in partnership with the DA's office, and should you win, she might very well be working with you. So, Deb, take it from here.
Sure. Thanks for having me. The DA's office interacts significantly with victims of violent crimes, and we know that certain populations of people are disproportionately victimized by interpersonal violence: women, children, those with disabilities, and people of color. Can you please talk about what services you think are most critical to supporting survivors of interpersonal violence, and what responsibility the DA's office has in developing, implementing, and funding those services?
Thank you so much for that question. In 2002, unfortunately, I lost my sister to domestic violence. Her domestic partner murdered her in front of her 2 boys. And our family has never been whole. It will never be whole because of that loss. While at the district attorney's office, we had a victim advocate who now works for Bavona, who assisted us in the misdemeanor section. When I entered the DA's office, you enter into the misdemeanor section, which handles a lot of domestic violence cases. It's the most heavy case-wise unit in the particular office. That support for victims was taken away from us in 2015. So if those victims are no longer protected or supported, that particular unit of the district attorney's office are mostly new hires who have come straight out of law school, who have no ability or no true training in how to support victims. So first thing I would do is put another victim advocate in that particular unit, because that is where we see the harassments, the assault seconds, and the criminal contempts in the second degrees. We know that domestic violence doesn't start with an arrest. It starts with a push, it starts with a shove, it starts with a harassment. So that is where we have to start, by supporting our victims on the ground level. I do believe that currently there's no support for would-be offenders. Those people who start with the shove and the push, we don't do anything to assist them so that they don't elevate their crimes and turn into serious offenders like the one person who killed my sister. We also have to provide, I believe, I would participate, I'm gonna just say this, I participated in a roundtable discussion with domestic violence professionals. And there was a suggestion that was wonderful that was made. Why not have a domestic violence court where that it can be streamlined so that all the services, all the cases across Monroe County can come to one judge so that everyone can be provided with the services that they need and the cases can be monitored. There's an IDV court, but you have to have a custody case going on as well as a domestic violence case. But what about a regular domestic violence case? Why can't we have a court that assists that? Thirdly, why not have a number that you can dial that will streamline all of the domestic violence assistance for providers? So like a 511, a 211 that we have, you can press 3 buttons and you can reach all the domestic violence providers. We have great domestic violence providers out there, but there's no way to streamline all of them to help in the time of need. I believe that is also necessary. But first, in the DA's office, we need a victim advocate to work with our misdemeanor section to assist our victims. 2, I will work on providing a domestic violence court. And 3, let's work with domestic violence providers to streamline all the support that is around Monroe County to aid domestic violence victims.
I asked your opponent this question, and I'm going to relay the same one to you. Is there one case that sticks with you more than others, the one that you still think about to this day, that you prosecuted?
Well, there was a there are a number of cases. And as many of you know, I started practicing in Atlanta, Georgia, for a number of years, everything from drug possession cases to homicide, and then here in the DA's office. But there was a domestic violence case that has always stuck with me and always bothered me. And you know, after losing my sister, these cases were very sensitive for me. But there was one particular case where there was a mother who was suffering from domestic violence from her husband, and I couldn't get her to testify against her husband. And I wouldn't let the case go. And I had a 911, I could use a 911 call, but I also had her daughter who witnessed it. And thinking I was using some type of trick, I said, well, I'll use your daughter. And she actually told me that she would let the daughter testify instead of herself. And that just broke my heart at the fact that she would allow her daughter to testify instead of her stepping forward. It was a very difficult case for me. In the end, the offender, who was not the father of the daughter, decided to take a plea so that the daughter would not have to testify. But that is telling of the type of assistance that our domestic violence victims need to have, and how the entire family is affected with domestic violence. And so that's one of the cases that I definitely remember. Well,
I want to end by asking you about the opioid epidemic. We have a task force here locally. You've seen the deaths, and it crosses geographic, ethnic boundaries. How would you influence that campaign if you were to be elected district attorney?
I would definitely continue to work with state and local agencies to ensure that we are using treatment as a method to combat the epidemic, as well as other drug addictions. We're not criminalizing the addict or the abuser. We are trying to find ways that they can overcome their addiction. Because not only does it affect them, it affects their entire family. So we would continue to utilize the opioid court we have here, but also in the DA's office, we can create individualized programs for opioid addicted persons as well as drug addicted persons. I want to have a social worker on my staff because we know that opioid addiction is also stemming from other issues. So why not create a comprehensive plan to address the issues that cause them to abuse and then offend? That is a more comprehensive plan than just send them to opioid court so they can go ahead and get clean, but let's dig deeper to address those issues that cause them to offend.
You've already mentioned some of this already, but I'm going to ask and end with this question. How do you limit or reduce the incarceration rate as we see it now?
Well, we are still incarcerating 40% of low-level nonviolent offenders. That's a waste of money. We can use those resources to address the individuals who perpetuate the harm against us. So as I just stated, I want to have a social worker on my staff to address those particular offenders. We can craft plans for our petty larceners or our criminal mischief individuals or those drug addicts or those with mental health issues and create individualized plans to address those issues so we can stop the revolving door of offending and we can keep them out of jails and prisons. We can use those resources for people who truly are out to harm us as a community. Those resources for those individuals should not be in jails and prisons. We can do better.
We saved enough time for your closing remarks. Okay. 1 minute, it's all yours.
Our criminal justice system is broken, but we have the tools to fix it. We now just must have the courage to make the changes. But we can do that together. I want to ensure that everyone is treated fairly under this criminal justice system. But with your support, we can ensure that this system is a fair system. I am running to protect victims of crime. I am here to prosecute those who harm us. I am here to utilize our public resources effectively, and I am here to administer the law fairly. And I am here to ask for your vote so that we can make these changes together to create a more safer, fair, and just Monroe County. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for this opportunity to be before you.
All right, Shani Curry Mitchell, thank you for your time. At this time, we want to thank both candidates for their participation, and of course, we want to thank the League of Women Voters for once again lending their voice and experience to our effort to maintain and strengthen our democracy. We continue our election coverage this weekend with County Executive candidate Adam Bello. Bello served as the Irondequoit Town Supervisor and Monroe County Clerk. Now the Democrat is going head-to-head against current County Executive Cheryl Donalfo, the Republican. Donalfo declined our invitation for a debate and a town hall. We will talk to Bello about the key issues that are facing Monroe County. Again, that's going to be Saturday, a town hall starting at 7:30 p.m. right here on News 8. Have a good night.